And certainly in midterm elections and local elections, we see a huge drop-off in terms of younger voters not participating like they would in a presidential election relative to other populations. Yeah, so this was an interesting piece of litigation. Florida has this 2 weeks of early in-person voting. The Secretary of State in 2014 made an advisory opinion when actually Alachua County, where the University of Florida is located, wanted to offer early in-person voting at the Rights Union, the campus union at the University of Florida. And the state Secretary of State said, you can't do that. You can't have early in-person voting on a college campus because even though it's a public facility, this doesn't constitute a community center. It wasn't challenged legally. It was set in place. And it wasn't until 2018 in the spring where a group led by the League of Women Voters, the Andrew Goodman Foundation, sued in federal court saying, this is a violation of not only the 14th Amendment and due process, it's also a violation of the 26th Amendment and discriminating against young people who disproportionately congregate on college campuses. After all, we had early in voting locations in retirement communities where there are no young people. It's all older folks, and they can come down to the lobby and cast an early in-person vote anytime before Election Day. They challenged this. I happened to be one of the experts that provided evidence in that successful lawsuit in federal court. And the Secretary of State and the supervisors that were named relented. 8 of the supervisors of elections, we have 67 counties, decided to work with campus administrators to create locations on college campus. And the Andrew Goodman Foundation, League of Women Voters, were very thrilled when over 50,000 people voted in these 8 locations. That's a lot of folks. And I did some quick and dirty analysis for the Andrew Goodman Foundation afterwards and found that, not surprising, most of the people who voted there were younger people. That's all well and good. And as a policy victory, it was a very strong one. As a political scientist, it raises a whole host of questions. Primarily, would these people have voted anyway? And so that's something as a scholar, I kind of take a step back more dispassionately, more analytically, try to figure out a research design that can tease out whether or not this actually had the impact that many of the advocates thought it would have.
What do we know about, did the students who voted early, would they have voted anyway?
It's a really tricky question. In many ways, you can think about this as an experimental design in which certain people get a treatment and other people are in the control population. And unfortunately, I don't have the ability to get through IRB to, through the scientific review process through the university to randomly assign people that they have access to an early voting location or not. And so I have to rely on administrative data and what's actually happened. And so in that regard, we don't really have a randomized assignment of people who have access and availability of these early voting locations. So you got to think ways to try to figure out confounds of what would it look like if for the people who would be in a similar situation but didn't get that treatment. And so the way that my co-author, Henrietta Sheena, who's a former student of mine, got her PhD at the University of Florida, is now at the University of North Florida, and I conceptualized this was let's look at using the voter file. I know people's age. I know how long they've been registered. I know where they registered and whether they're still registered in the same county. I know their race. I know their political party. And basically be able to say, let's look at those people who were in the same county in 2016, who were in the same county in the same location in 2018. Let's look to see whether they voted or not in 2016. And let's see what their pattern was in 2018. Were the voters who didn't turn out in 2016, a presidential election, likely to turn out to vote now that they had exposure to this convenience of being very close to a college campus and being able to vote on any one of those days as opposed to having to go to another early voting location where there's not public transportation or they don't have private car to get to. And then compare the younger folks in that county to the older folks. So looking at the difference in the difference. But then the treatment is really in that county as opposed to, say, all the surrounding counties. And looking at those counties and their younger population versus the older population in the control group. And so it's not perfect. The surrounding counties of these 8 counties are not exactly like it, almost by definition, if you think about central Pennsylvania and Center County being a little different from the surrounding counties. Why? Because of Penn State University. But at the same time, we're able to hold constant a lot of other factors to be able to see whether or not these folks were more likely to turn out to vote than their compatriots, also young, were in these other counties that didn't have that exposure to early in-person voting on campus.
And does early voting on college campuses happen in any other states?
Well, there's been a lot of litigation and challenges. There was litigation in Texas, for instance, where they've had early in-person voting for a long time, and many universities allow it on college campuses. You had Prairie View College, university, which is a historically black campus that the administrators wanted it, and the Waller County supervisor election didn't want it on campus. There was some litigation and settlement to allow certain hours. We've seen the same type of thing in North Carolina, where there was early in-person voting on some college campuses. Appalachian State was one, and then the new county supervisor said, no, we're not going to allow it. It's very contentious because we know the profile of younger voters. There is a partisan hue to them. They don't tend to turn out. And so certain factors and factions want it to be that way, and others would like to have the expanding of the electorate.